Welcome to Storied Showdown, where Magic the Gathering's lore jumps right off the page and onto the battlefield. Each month, 3 guests and I will pick an official Magic the Gathering story, something published online or even in print, and build a commander deck inspired by that tale. Now, each week, I'll sit down with the guests to dive into why they chose their story, what it means to them, and how they turn it into a playable deck full of flavor, theme, and personal interpretation. And then, well, it all culminates into a final battle. 4 stories, 1 epic commander game. This is Storied Showdown. When stories meet, legends rise. What was the story that you chose for this challenge? And, what drew you to that story specifically?
So the story that I ended up choosing is His Eyes, All of Them. Which is a story by Margaret Killjoy. So I've never been a big Vorthos guy. So the story, I've always been aware of it. I kind of know what's going on when a new set comes out. I like to see what's going on, but I never dive too deeply into it. So what drew me to this story is I'm just a fan of the author. She's a really great novelist. She has a lot of podcasts. She has a really rad black metal band that I listen to. So when I heard her mention on a podcast that she had done some writing for Wizards of the Coast, I was like, okay, I gotta figure out what's going on here. And then I found the story, and when I knew that this was going on, I was like, oh, I know what I'm doing. We gotta go with that.
Hell yeah. What's the band's name?
Feminazgul.
Feminazgul?
Yeah.
That's sick. What kind of music?
It's just really grungy black metal.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it's just her. I think on the first album, or at least the EP, it's just her by herself doing everything.
Sick.
And then she brought in 2 other women to join her for a second album, and it's fun. If you like black metal, it's not for everyone.
Oh no, I love black metal. One of my favorite bands is called Keys of Orthanc.
Okay.
It's a Canadian doom black metal band that's all centered around Lord of the Rings. So
oh, I love that.
One of my favorite album by them is called Battle in the Dark Lands of the Eye. So totally right there with you. I absolutely love that grungy deep metal.
That, yeah.
So when you were reading Miss Killjoy's piece, was when you chose that for this, was that your first time reading it, or is this a story that has kind of pulled you back in a couple times?
It's a story that I had been familiar with.
Okay.
I will be the first to admit that Mid-Vow, Midnight Hunt, Crimson Vow, was not my favorite block. Okay. So I did not read the stories for that one. So when I saw that she had wrote the story, I was like, oh, cool. And then I saw it was for Midnight Hunt, and I was like, neat. And then I moved on. But then I was like, okay, well, if I'm gonna build a deck, I should read the story. And I was pleasantly surprised. It's very good. So.
Yeah. It's super good. It's definitely a diamond in the rough, if you will. That whole the stories for Crimson Vow and Midnight Hunt were pretty shallow, and there wasn't a whole lot of depth to them. And you can't really blame them. They were writing a huge story about that takes place during one single event. But yes. When you were reading this story, when you were kind of ingratiating yourself back into this world that you kind of skipped over, were there any particular characters or moments or maybe elements of that setting that really stood out to you?
So what I really liked about this story was the 2 protagonists are interesting. They're very different. And then the other kind of side characters that are added in. And then I love the way that they portrayed Stick Fingers.
Yeah.
So one, we get Vadric, who's this is his first introduction to the story proper. Before this, he had just been depicted in Lunar Mystic, which is a card from Avacyn Restored. And then Rem had been mentioned, or Rem Carlos.
Yeah.
Corollas. Rem K had been mentioned in a lot of little things here and there. He'd been in flavor texts and some mentioned in cards and stuff. So it was a very cool introduction to these 2 characters. We have the gay space wizard Vadric, who ends up being very interesting and has in the very little time we get to see him, we get a full backstory.
Yeah.
We learn a lot about him. We see we know he's from Nephalia. His husband's from Lamholt. And then we have Rem Carlos, who's kind of this notorious swashbuckler kind of guy. So they don't fight.
Yeah.
But like I was mentioning with Stick Fingers, he goes from being a like a murderous villain to an almost sympathetic, misunderstood protector who didn't really want to be here. He had just been summoned and was doing what he was asked to do. So rather than just being your standard like horror movie kind of monster, he ends up going through these like little vignettes of he's a villain, he's misunderstood, he's a villain again, he's killing more people, and then by the end he's a goat herder. Like we love it about him. Absolutely.
I love that. No, gay space pirate, I think, is probably the best way to describe him I've ever heard. So yeah,
absolutely.
Well, that's awesome. About those characters, the specific moments that called to you, was it really that kind of character development? Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked how they go from this like ragtag duo who are both good at what they do, but together may not work, and it doesn't at first. They do not like each other. But then as the story goes on, they kind of learn how each other functions. They notice each other's strengths, and they build upon that, which, as we'll get to later, also kind of shows up in the card pair. But
hey, it's your classic enemies to lovers trope,
Oh, absolutely.
When you were reading these stories, when you were reading the story, when you were kind of enveloping yourself with these characters and really kind of going through that development with them, did you see any real world parallels or any personal experiences that maybe had make this story resonate with you a little bit deeper than some other Magic stories you've read?
Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of the kind of experiences that these folks had. Thankfully, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. You don't encounter too many zombies or gay space pirates, so yeah.
Yeah. Not a lot of gay space wizards. Not a lot of old horrors in the forest. I do have a forest like directly behind my house, so I've been turning the lights on a little bit more. But they're outside of it just being like a really great piece of horror fiction. I haven't had much connection to it, I guess you could say.
That's completely valid. So kind of changing lanes a little bit, we've talked about what drew you to the story, what kind of kept you enthralled by the story. I'd love to kind of shift and start talking about the deck that you built for this. So when you started building this deck, where did you begin? Did you begin with the character? Did you begin with a mechanic, or did you just begin with a vibe in general?
So as I read the story, I had kind of two thoughts. The first one was, I really hope these protagonists have cards, because I thought it would be really fun to see how they would interact. And they did. My other thought was running old Stick Fingers. And I felt like it was going to be harder to tell this story in its entirety with Stick Fingers. Just being a two-color pair, and the story itself being less focused on Stick Fingers himself, and more being about the other two. I thought that even though they're not partners, we could probably rule zero a partner here. And then when I saw that they had synergy, I was like, it has to be this, right? So I took that. I knew I want to do something with that, and then the next step was, okay, I have my commanders. Do I just let them be do I just let them dictate my colors, or do I build something around them? And I figured if we're doing a deck that is going to be, kind of thematic and tell a story, I want to incorporate those characters. So I ran through some ideas. I was kind of looking at what typical builds were for both. I saw Rem is typically a burn deck. I know Vadric is infamous for being the $25 CEDH Storm deck. And I play Storm in Modern, and I did not want to play Solitaire in a Commander game. So I'll do that elsewhere.
That's fair.
So that was the obvious choice. So I dug a little deeper, and I thought, well, if I look at the two cards, we have Rem, who helps with the he adds damage to spells, right? And then Vadric reduces costs. So I was like, this is a spellslinger deck.
There
It
you
wants
go.
to happen. But because I was trying to stick within Innistrad as much as I could, and I tried to use as many mid-vow burn spells and things as I could, I needed to support that. And then I kind of developed this secondary like sub-theme with like gutter snipe effects. So whenever you cast a spell, you do damage with this, which is great.
Field and stuff like that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Electrostatic field, and it worked great because Thermo Alchemist is straight from the mid-vow, and then there's Keswick Flamebreather.
Yeah.
So I was able to incorporate from the set itself to kind of support the sub theme, and it got me kind of like, okay, this is kind of like near the climax of the story when Vadric and Rem are working together in the town, and they're kind of getting the townsfolk to help them out. So I was able to kind of build upon the story there, and like all my little creatures are the townsfolk who are coming to help at the end to protect against old stick fingers. So
I absolutely adore that you were able to kind of work those story moments into the deck building. I think that can probably be one of the harder elements of this challenge to accomplish, for sure. So with that in mind, were there some story beats that you wanted to include but were hard to translate into deck form? And if there are, how did you work around that?
So I so badly wanted to incorporate Stickfinger somehow. Of course, it's not a 5-color deck, so I couldn't get the Golgari in there. I'm stuck with Jeskai. But and then the whole scene where they were like pursuing him and trying to find him, and then that initial fight, and then when he gets away, that would have been a really cool thing to add. And I wasn't able to find a way to kind of add like a pursuit element while staying within my deck's game plan. Because while I wanted to be thematic, I also wanted it to be playable. So I had to skip on that, unfortunately. And then I really wanted to add more of the occult aspect to it, more of the summoning of old stick fingers and all the mobiles and things that kind of kept him. But again, I struggled to find cards that would both support the theme and were in the colors, because that feels very green and black, as it makes sense because stick fingers. But so I wasn't able to incorporate those sides of the story as much as I would have liked. So instead I focused solely on the protagonist and what they're able to accomplish.
That is an interesting development when we're dealing with this kind of creative box, right? When we want to create a deck that's reflecting a story specifically, how do you balance staying true to that story and those characters and still creating a deck that will function in a game of Commander? And it sounds like you were able to do that by kind of omitting a little bit of the stuff that didn't fit in the colors, but you still overall have a deck that stays true to at least the main characters, which I honestly am super impressed with, because reading the story, I struggled to see. I felt like, oh man, this would be a challenge for me, but that is a testament to how we perceive these stories differently, right? We each connect with stories on a different level, so we're going to take different things away from them. And so that's an excellent I guess thing to think about moving forward.
I think the way that I kind of helped myself stay on theme is I gave myself rules at the very beginning. So the 4 rules I had were, I wanted us to use as many mid-vow cards as I could. I wanted to not use anything Universes Beyond and as few plane-specific cards as possible. So I didn't want to use anything that was like distinctly Amonkhet or distinctly Dominaria, right? I wanted it to be Innistrad. So if I had a card that was kind of themed on that, or the art kind of fit in, I felt that I could use that while still trying to stick to rule 1, right? But absolutely no Universes Beyond. I wanted to keep directly in what I was doing. My 3rd rule, I wanted to make flavorful choices that reflected the story when they presented themselves. So that's why I have 2 different goats with the creatures. They don't do anything to help the deck, but I have Possessed Goat and I have where is he? Possessed Goat and Frantic Scapegoat. So they don't help the deck, but they're present. And then fourth, I wanted to stay away from building that storm deck. Like I had to make that a rule. I'm not gonna.
I think that's a valid choice. You know, and that is another element. That is another element to this challenge, right? Is building a deck that fits the story, but that also fits a style you enjoy playing. Not everybody wants to take a 20-minute storm turn. And
no, it's not
you
fun
made
to
that
play
choice.
Against.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. So, kind of discussing, you know, we talked about the 2 goats that you included. Were there any other deep cut cards or flavor wins that you think are in your deck that you're especially proud of?
There is one specifically, other than the goats. The goats I'm very proud of. They had to be there. But the one that feels like it doesn't necessarily fit with the deck, and it does help in a way. But I included 1 copy of Aura of Silence. As kind of a nod to the moment in the story when Vadric makes Ren's mouth disappear for being kind of arrogant. So we've got that in there, and then that kind of gave me a little bit more permission to add a little bit more stacksy elements.
Yeah,
since I'm a little light on creatures, so I need a little bit more protection.
That interaction,
so I've got my Aura of Silence. I've got my Ghostly Prison. I've got my Propaganda. You know, just ways to keep people from coming at me, because all I can really do is sling some spells and block with a goat. So
I love that. So now I know the audience won't know this, but I know that you play a lot of the more competitive formats.
Yeah.
So when you were kind of going into the process of deck building for this project specifically, was there a big difference in your approach to that deck building? How is this process different from, say, you know, preparing for, you know, building a deck for Modern or, you know, Pauper?
Yeah, when I'm playing like a 1v1 format, I'm definitely a spike, right? I'm not against net decking. I'm not against trying to put my own flair on something, but for the most part, going with the most optimal choices, especially in, you know, formats like Modern, Pauper, Vintage, whatever it might be. But when it comes to Commander, interestingly enough, I'm much more of like a Johnny. Like, I just go crazy. I like being goofy, and it's my place to do it, because, you know, multiplayer is meant to be fun.
Yeah.
I take my opponent's experience into account when I'm deck building. So I don't want to have some kind of overly tuned, you know, crazy. I didn't put any game changers in the deck. I didn't put any kind of 2-card combos.
Sure.
In fact, I specifically I had one in there at one point, and I took it out because I was like, I don't want to win this way. This isn't how I want to do it. There was another combo. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, but I pulled it out because it was too mathy, and I was like,
wow.
I can't.
I want to do that.
I don't feel like doing math on my you know, time off, so we're gonna step away from that. I definitely just built it in a way where I could, you know, have fun and goof around and you know, throw a goat out there or two. And
yeah.
You know,
so building a Commander deck for you is kind of a creative outlet in a way that you don't necessarily get when you're building for a more competitive style.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely take a little bit more liberty with what I'm doing, or just add the fun card, right? Yeah. I can give myself permission to add the fun card. My most played Commander when I am just playing with a pod is probably my Mira deck, like the Attractions deck. It's Roller Coaster Tycoon, the Magic deck.
Yeah.
I just get to build my little contraptions and lose, but it's really fun to do so.
Hey, some of my favorite decks to play are decks that have never won me a game, but have been a blast to pilot all the way down to the Burning Wreckage. So
absolutely.
So when I approached you for this, you were obviously excited and willing, which I'm super thankful for, because it's the first time I've ever done this. But outside of that, I know that you state that you're not much of a Vorthos person. You're not much of not one to really focus too heavily on the story or the lore per se. Do you think that storytelling has a place in gameplay? How important is flavor when you're building decks and stuff like that, especially when playing a game like Commander?
So it's a multifaceted answer. It's a great question, because I don't personally take flavor and story into deck building too often, but I think story is everything, right? The reason why Magic is such a great game is because it has such an amazing story. we're able to introduce all these characters, and we could just have game pieces that, you know, don't mean anything. But the reason why the game's been around for almost as long as, actually, almost exactly 6 months longer than I have been around, is because of that, right? The novels, the stories, the you know, the cosplayers, the just everything, any kind of creative outlet outside of spending too much money on cardboard and then turning it sideways, right? All of the things are important, and of course, like, I'm a former like English teacher, so I'm sure that's coming through. I find like literature to be very important regardless. But even the games we play are stories, right? While I may not read every story that comes out as it's coming and get really hyped up, I still go and tell my friends about what happened in the last game, right? I still, oh man, I played Worldfire and then I died because of it. How stupid was that? Like, it was a great story. Or, hey, I built this like really cool deck based on a story and I put 2 goats in it. They're not gonna do anything for me, but I did it. Or I had this Mirror Tribal deck. I remember when I first started playing Magic, some kid sold me a bunch of Mirror for way more than it was worth because I didn't understand how good it was yet, and he said it was a cool deck, and now here I am 11 years later with an actual functional Mirror deck, and it does cool things. Like, the stories are everything. It doesn't just have to be, you know, the Vorthos itself. We are creating our own lore as we play.
Yeah. No, you know, that is beautiful. And I've always thought that when we're playing Magic the Gathering, that is one of the key ways that we as an audience get to interact with the story. We get to take those pieces and we get to kind of carry on these characters' legacies essentially with us, you know? Absolutely. If you read a story, you might understand why Shieldred is evil, but when you play a game against someone that's running Shieldred, you understand why Shieldred is evil.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's a beautiful element of this game, and I'm really happy that that you also feel that way. What do you hope people understand or feel when they see your deck on the table? Not just in the game with us, but moving forward past this. If you ever take this deck to an LGS or anything, like, what do you hope people experience when that deck hits the table?
So, in more of like an abstract sense, I hope they see this as like a viable option, right? I'm a bit of a musician on the side, and I've done a lot of electronic stuff. And when I look at my, you know, program with infinite sound possibilities, you get decision paralysis, right? So sometimes restriction is freeing, and giving yourself a set of rules to adhere to can allow you to be more creative, and then you can go from there. Yeah. So I would hope that if I took this to an LGS and I played with a random group of strangers and they were like, what's the story behind this, why this isn't what you normally play, I can say, well, I mean, I read a story and I liked it, so I built a deck around it.
Yeah.
And I actually got a deck built instead of an architect with 600 cards in it saying, well, what do I cut? Like, having that having this experience, which is something I've never done before, I think will probably inform, you know, deck building for me going forward. And I hope that people who either watch this or, you know, play against my deck or any of the others' decks in the future can see it as a viable strategy. You know, doesn't all have to be.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think one of my favorite things is just scrolling through Scryfall, just like selecting, you know, give me random colors, give me legendary creatures, and let me just like see what I can go through and find, instead of you know, building decks that I connect with. Building decks that, you know, have a story behind them can oftentimes be a little bit more fulfilling, or fulfilling in a different way than just like like you said, going to EDH Rec and clicking all the high synergy cards, and you know what I mean. It's definitely a way, but I respect.
We've all built a deck like that.
Yeah, we've absolutely all built a deck like that.
And people don't like playing against them because they
do
good.
Not. Yeah.
Like Paz will never see the table again.
Yeah, there you go. So when this is all said and done, when we're done playing this game, what do you hope people take away from this episode about your story specifically, about your deck specifically, or your feelings about connecting lore and gameplay?
I just hope they try it, you know. It's just there's so many good stories out there. I've already started looking at more stories and like what can I do next.
Ooh.
And I hope that folks can look at that and try it for themselves. I would love to see this become a trend.
Yeah.
Right. Just a bunch of people get together and be like, here is my story deck. Your Lorwyn story deck can't beat it. Prove it. Right.
I love that. And so you said that you had kind of explored a couple other stories since then, which is beautiful. I'm super happy to hear that. Are there any other Magic stories that you've come across that you'd like to turn into a deck someday?
Yes. So my very first official set, I started playing 2 weeks before Constant Secure dropped. So that's like my set. So it's got to be the Truth of Names.
Okay.
Alicia's introduction to the world, powerful trans woman. We love her. I want to build that deck. I want to put her out there. So
I love that. It's really interesting too, right? That a story from Cons called The Truth of Names, when you look forward to now Dragonstorm, Bolus kind of regaining his power in the end after he's reminded of his name. The Truth of Names comes full circle. I honestly didn't think about that till right now, but Alicia's story is beautiful.
It's a great story,
and that's an excellent choice. And I genuinely hope you build that deck. I would love to see the deck list for that. And that's a wrap on this episode of Storied Showdown. One story has entered the fray so far, but who will win? It's anybody's guess. I hope you loved Jason's pick. His Eyes, All of Them is an incredible story. If you like Old Stick Fingers, if you like Innistrad as a plane in general, I hope you go forward, check out the story, read it. The deck list and the story will be pinned in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week when we meet the next contester in this month's Storied Showdown.